What's good, party people? This is According to Woods, and I have the honor and pleasure, the privilege rather, to have combat sports enthusiast, MC, ring announcer, commentator, and a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt. He is the one and only Garett Fertig. Garett, how are you doing, brother?
I'm doing good. Just hanging out. You said you wanted me on the podcast. I said, sure, let's do it. So,
well, I definitely appreciate it because you are literally the bastion of. See, I've got the NWA,
I saw the
10,000
NWA
gold
count
behind me, and the California state title. And I'm like you, a combat sports enthusiast, but a lot of people kind of get lost in terms of the regional scene. LA had the Grand Olympic Auditorium, and you guys had Don Owens's Portland Wrestling, that spanned, the Jesse and Art Bar and, Maniac Matt Boren, who later went on to be Doink the Clown, Rowdy
Stories about Matt.
so many stars. And you're kind of at the throng of it because you grew up in that area. What was it like kind of growing up as a kid in the Pacific Northwest and having those kind of influences around you?
So, like, one of my earliest memories of wrestling in the Northwest was when Art became Beetlejuice. Art Barr became Beetlejuice, which I don't know if people might know that, people might not know that, but Piper gave him the Beetlejuice gimmick, and every town they would do the same gimmick where they put the sheet over him, throw a bunch of crap in the sheet, and then boom, he became Beetlejuice. Well, I was in Eugene when they did it, and unbeknownst to me, I think it was 87 that happened. So I was 7 years old. I didn't know what was going on. I was like, all right, they're doing some weird shit with a guy, in a sheet. And only person I knew out of all those guys really was Piper. But, back then, to me, it was just, these guys were huge because I'm 7, 8 years old. I'd never been to Portland really to even think wrestling was around. But I went to Eugene to the Armory because that's where wrestling was in Eugene, where I used to live. And just growing up, it's weird to think that back then, like, my first memory is watching Piper turn Art Barr into Beetlejuice when fast forward, I don't know, 25, 30 years later, I worked for Rowdy on Portland Wrestling Uncut. And that one of the coolest things I've ever had in my career as an announcer or commentator is I'm walking in the hall and Piper looks at me and goes, Garett. And I'm like, holy shit, Roddy Piper knows my name. Just stuff like that, and then come down the road a couple years ago, I was working in Vegas, and Stitch Duran, UFC cut man, he was part of FFC in Vegas that I announced for, and I'd be standing there waiting for the guys to come out, and Stitch is standing on the apron, and he's like, doing a hell of a job, kid, doing a hell of a job. I'm like, Stitch just told me I did a hell of a job. This is so weird. Like, it's not something I'm used to. But anyway, I digress. Back to your question about growing up, always being a wrestling fan, and not really knowing other than Portland wrestling and then the WWF and back then NWA. I didn't know anything other than those. And growing up, I was a Portland wrestling fan and an NWA fan. I really wasn't a Hogan fan. I wasn't really a Savage fan. I was a Flair, Arn, Tully. The NWA back then, I liked the Southern style of wrestling, or I guess Mid-South, but Mid-Atlantic, sorry.
Yeah, see, I was on the other side of the spectrum because, like, I was born in San Francisco, and we had WWF that comes to the Cow Palace, a couple times a year, and this was after the San Francisco territory was kind of dying down, in the mid to late 80s and what have you. So my first kind of memory of anything combat sports was actually when I was 2, funny enough, Saturday night's main event, one half of the Hart Foundation, Bret the Hitman Hart, flanked by Jim the Anvil Neidhart and Jimmy Hart, against Randy Savage, with Elizabeth. And I can call the match in my head. It's so, it's artistic poetry in terms of wrestling. Yeah, the story that they told, and they, not to give too much away, but they injured Randy's leg and what have you. He had to take the boot off and wins by the most dangerous move in pro wrestling, the schoolboy, and right. But from that, I kind of expanded, like that was in a ring.
Mhm.
And then, seeing Tyson and Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. and Tommy Hitman Hearns and what have you. And I was just like, oh, that's in a ring too. Screw comic books and everything like that. The greatest stories that ever are told are ones in a ring and then later a cage. And how that happened was essentially Dan Severn. Think about what we knew about combat sports as a whole, in the early 90s. And the Harts, you had Stu Hart, who had 12 kids. Literally all the boys became wrestlers, all the girls married wrestlers, and
Right.
Stu would stretch the every living shit out of weightlifters, bodybuilders. And one time out of the year when they had the Calgary Stampede, a wrestling bear, a dude who could actually choke out a bear. And I was just like, that's awesome. So I knew Owen and Brett were the biggest things, right? And then to see this guy from Coldwater, Michigan, flanked by Jim Cornette with 3 non-WWF titles and one being the one right behind me, that man, UFC Hall of Famer, Dan the Beast Severn, I was just like, what is this? Is this a new type of wrestling? Is this like WCW, UFC, and whatever? And yeah, and here we go, and I mean, where did you make the switch? I mean, you've kind of been able to do everything, whether it be, jiu-jitsu, MMA, pro wrestling, lucha libre. Was there kind of a shift that happened, or did it just all come together?
Oh, no. So I started, I was a professional wrestler from 2002 to 2010, and I'm pretty small. I mean, especially then, I weighed 174 pounds, and this is in 2002. So I was definitely, even by Northwest standards, I was a small guy. So I was the guy who was getting chucked around everywhere. And it just, to me, I started getting concussions and things like that. And long story short, October of 2010, I was doing a match, and I was wrestling a guy named Dr. Cleaver, and we were on top gonna do a high spot off the top. We do the high spot to the double down and punch, punch, punch. And then the next thing I remember, I'm in the shower, and I was like, okay, how the fuck did I get in the shower? And so I do my thing, and I got all freaked out, and I was like, that's not normal. So I told the promoter, I'm like, I'm done. And he's like, what do you mean you're done? I was like, I don't remember the match. He goes, oh, it was great. It was great. I'm like, well, no, like legit, I don't remember the match. I remember that one spot, and then I don't remember anything else. And so it just freaked me out. And come to find out, before that, this is kind of a weird story, and it sounds super like fake, but
let's do it.
In April of that year, I was planting flowers in my front yard. This is why it sounds stupid. I was planting azaleas, and then I went to wrestling training that afternoon, and I don't remember. The only thing I remember is planting those azaleas, and then the next thing I remember is I was in the hospital at midnight. And so what had happened is I got diagnosed with transient global amnesia. Like I said, it sounds super fake. It's a real thing. Look it up. But basically, your brain shuts down so your body can function, and so I have no memory of it whatsoever. I didn't get in a car accident. I wasn't taking any crazy bumps. But have you ever you've seen the movie 50 First Dates with Sandler?
Yeah.
Okay, so you remember the guy that would just go, hi, I'm Bob. That was what I was. My memory was like 30 seconds long. When they took me to the hospital, this is everything everybody's telling me. I didn't know my wife's name. I didn't know my wedding date. I didn't know my birthday. I knew my first name was all I knew. And my wife's like, yeah, they handed you the medical sheet for you to fill out. You had no idea what you were doing. Like, yeah, okay, whatever. I don't remember it. And so apparently transient global amnesia, it affects people like in their 60s. I was 29 at the time. And I was the youngest person the emergency room doctor or my own doctor had ever seen have it. And consequently, what happens is you get transient global amnesia. It makes it easier to get concussions. So that was April. I got a concussion in like May, and then that double down off the top in October. And I'm like, I'm done. So that was the end of my wrestling career. And that was October 2010. I was like, well, I can't be done with wrestling because I just can't. And so I asked the promoter of that promotion, it was DOA Pro Wrestling up in Portland. And I said, hey, you guys don't have a commentator, you don't have an announcer. Can I do it? And the guy's like, sure, whatever. So that was where I started announcing, and then did announcing and commentating for them. And then a few years down the road, started doing announcing for MMA. So that's how it went from there. I announced my first MMA gig April of 14, I think. And I was up in Vancouver, Washington for main event MMA for Nick Cunning. I have to think about this stuff. My memory is terrible. And so I announced that. And then the following week, I'm like, well, if I'm going to be announcing this MMA stuff, I should probably know what I'm looking at. So I went to a gym in town, and Dave Hagen, he's a UFC judge, he was at the gym and he was coaching guys at the gym, and he was the referee of the fights that I had just done, but he didn't even recognize me. And I was like, oh, cool. This is where I want to be because I want to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And he's like, you don't want a tour? I was like, no, I'm good. And so I just started doing no-gi Jiu-Jitsu then, and just kind of snowballed from there. So it went, pro wrestling. And I started doing jits mostly because lifting weights got really boring because I had no reason to be big anymore, and lifting heavy, being as small as I was, it was messing with my joints. And so I was like, screw it. I'm going to stop lifting iron and I'm going to start lifting people. So that's essentially what it ended up doing. So.
Oh, that's so brilliant. That's so brilliant. But it's crazy, as we saw with the Undertaker's Last Ride documentary, where he literally is straight shooting. The fact that he doesn't remember the match with Brock at all. He, had to be taken, and it's just weird in terms of how the brain works, or when it ceases to function in certain ways, what you can and can't remember. These are things that we're still finding out with, CTE and what have you. I mean, look no further than Monday nights with Corey Graves, and he was Sterling James Keenan, on the indie scene, was tearing it up in NXT. One of the inaugural NXT tag team champions with Pac or Neville, and got that life altering concussion, but it ended up giving birth to this amazing career, that he's still doing to this day.
Right, which it's kind of the same thing as mine is, just with less money. But the funny thing is my wife likes the fact that I commentate and announce way more because I make a lot more money doing this than I was wrestling, and I'm not taking the bumps. So,
no, 100%. Now, I have to ask because having trained in, being a dual sport athlete. Having trained in professional wrestling, and then, but you're doing no-gi jiu-jitsu. Were there any type of shoot moves that you kind of remembered or harken back to in your formal days of training as a pro wrestler that kind of suited you?
Oh yeah. All of them. So I started no-gi, and to kind of give you the Brazilian jiu-jitsu background, I started with a team called Team Chaos in Salem, here where I live, and it was like, okay, no-gi, I get it, we're grappling, but it's sort of like wrestling. I didn't wrestle in high school. I thought wrestling was dumb in high school, which is weird. But because then down the road I'm the guy wearing spandex and oiling up. What's weird now? So I started doing that, and when they start showing me kimuras and things like that, I'm like, well, that's a hammerlock essentially, and then it goes to double wrist lock. So now it's catch wrestling. And then I get into catch as well. So I'm seeing stuff down the line that's like, okay, a front chancery, well, that's a front head and arm, or, front guillotine. So there's a lot of similarities. But the thing that was weird is, in pro wrestling, you're taught to be light, you're not trying to stiff somebody. Well, in jiu-jitsu, you're trying to stiff somebody, you're trying to put the shoot hold on. And so for the longest time with me, I'd essentially put a work hold on somebody and, just let them get out because that's what I knew. And now I've been doing jits for 6 years. It's like you're not getting out. I'll cinch it in, and we're gonna ride this out. So, there's a lot of similarities for moves and the sequence that things happen in jiu-jitsu and in pro wrestling. Because jiu-jitsu, Elio Gracie said one time, he said jiu-jitsu is basically you do a move, I do a move, you do a move, I do a move forever, which that's chain wrestling.
Exactly, that catch can style, and that one was when I was watching pro wrestling as a kid. When Gorilla Monsoon or later Jim Ross would talk about that, and I was just like, man, that's different. Than the high flying or the dramatics that other wrestlers would implore, I would just be like, what is that? So when like guys like, Furnace and LaFon came to the WWF, the Steiners came to the WWF, Regal later, there was Dr. Death, Steve Williams. It's just those guys, even though they didn't do catch, specifically, they were very, well versed in the ground game, and that always attracted me. And that's also what I love. I mean, I'm a forever white belt in jiu-jitsu, but that's stuff that I love to, that chain wrestling, that catch as catch can style, and it's just it's very complex for somebody that doesn't know it, but then kind of the jiu-jitsu heads that are like that study the moves and drill and practice them every day. I mean, it's amazing.
Well, and one of the things that's interesting is, so like I told you before we started, my buddy Jay is the one who trained me to wrestle, and I wrestled, or what, he wrestled I think 6 years before I got to him, and he trained me. Well, he's in his late 40s now, just getting into jiu-jitsu, and he's like, man, I wish I would have got into this sooner. I was like, well, now it's come full circle, because I can teach you what I know, because I've been doing it as long as you have been doing wrestling when you taught me.
That's so sick. That's so sick. And especially the fact that, you could have just said, hey, and many wrestlers have done that, where they just like, well, my career is done and I'm just going to walk away from the biz. And away goes with it. All of the miles that they've traveled, all of the, relationships that they've cultivated, and the skills that they've learned, and especially if you're a great promo, if you can talk people, if you're the Pied Piper that can talk people into seats, there's another way that you could utilize it, and all you have to do is do an incremental shift, and you can get to the promised land, such as yourself.
What the funny thing with that, though, is when I started wrestling back in 2002, I hated the microphone. Don't even put it in front of my face. I don't want to cut a promo. No, thank you. No. I used to have a tag partner named Tony Terrific, and we were the American Idols, the babyface tag team when we started. And it was Tony Terrific on the mic. And Tony, he was a preschool teacher, was his regular job. So he was good with kids, and I hate kids. And, we're going to the ring slapping hands and all that. And I'm like, nah, I'm good. So I'm a natural heel. But he'd cut promos. And there were times, and I swear to God, more than a couple of times, we'd be at the gimmick table after the match, and kids would come up and go, oh, hey, Tony Terrific. And then they'd look at me and go, did you wrestle? I'm like, yeah, I'm his tag partner. Because I didn't say anything. I just worked, and I didn't want to be a personality. So they didn't even realize I was there. I was default wrestler 1 for quite a while until I became a heel. And then I was like, oh, I can just be a dick, and that's what happens. So that's how I got good at promos, is just by being, myself and being a dickhead.
That's hilarious. I think that's hilarious. And that's one of the things that I think the psychology gets lost, right? Because, everything in today's kind of style of wrestling is kind of high spot, like a Mexican luchador. Let me get my fucking shit in, and then we'll go home, right? And a lot of people are like, oh, if I can do the flashy moves, I'll be a big star. But that's not necessarily the case. There has to be some intangible that you would have, and that's what you found.
Well, and when I was a heel, like towards the end of my career, I'd cut my promos and whatnot, and I tried to keep it, have a little bit of realness in what it is. I went by G-Shock, which is not my name whatsoever, but people knew me, and they knew I was a good promo, and they knew I could bump, and they knew I could work. And a lot of times I was willing to do anything. Like, I remember one time, it was probably 06 or something. This smaller guy, James Freeman, he goes, hey, what do you think about doing a reverse hurricanrana off the top? And I was like, as long as we don't hit the ceiling, I don't care. He's like, all right, cool. He goes, I've asked a bunch of people and they won't do it. I'm like, whatever, let's fucking do it. I don't care. And I would just do shit like that, or guys, hey, what do you think about this? Well, no, if you try, man, that's the only way we're gonna figure this out. And so yeah, I would do whatever needed to get done, because I was never afraid of getting egg in my face as a heel. I figured if I could make myself look stupid at my own expense to make the babyface look good, whether it was chicken shit heel or whatever the case may be, I'm all for it. I don't care. So I'm playing a character, even though it's essentially me. But who fucking cares? So there were lots of times where it was just like, sure, this is what you want, fine. I mean, I remember doing a match one time, and I was a champ of this promotion, and the guy wanted to drop the belt, take it off me, and put it on somebody else, and he wanted it done in 30 seconds. And the guy that he wanted to put it on was smaller than I was, and I was like, okay. So I went to the ref and I said, look, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to do this as fast as possible. I don't even want to take 30 seconds. And the referee's name is Dave, and he was like, what do you got in mind? I said, I want you to start arguing with me. Argue with me. Pat's going to roll me up. 1, 2, 3. And he's like, that's it? I was like, yeah, that's it. I'm not even going to do anything. He's like, oh, okay. So literally we do that whole match from bell to him arguing with me to the 3 count was 18 seconds. And I just handed the belt, walked away. I was like, well, who fucking cares? Put all the heat on the referee, and I didn't look like an asshole in the process.
And you made it to the pay window, didn't you?
Without having to take a bump.
See, and proving that you're not paid by the hour. If you're gonna pay me the same working 18 seconds and a 20-minute barn burner, Broadway.
Yep.
Screw it.
And it's
easy
funny,
money.
I use that same thing when I am in like doing post fights for MMA. If a guy gets it done quick, I'll always say, well, you're not getting paid by the hour. And a lot of times they look at me like, no, I guess I'm not. No, you're not. You get your purse no matter what, man. So whether it took you 5 rounds or it took you, 5 seconds, you're getting paid the same either way.
Yeah, 100%. And that's one of the things that I miss about kind of like old school commentary and old school wrestling, where the stakes were high and low. Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon forever would be like, hey, this guy, if they won, they're making it to the pay window. And, like if they were, like kind of making their comeback or so to speak, they'd be like, he wants to make it to the pay window, because there was a, like it mattered in the psychology of the match. And it could even be, like a short 1, 2, 3, type deal. But it's just like the stakes mattered.
Right. And Jim Ross does that now with AEW. He'll say a lot of times, guy wants the winner's purse. And now with MMA and people knowing, how much money guys are making for a UFC event, they know that a winner typically makes more money than the guy who lost. So people get it, and Jim Ross is trying to portray pro wrestling as a prize fight, which, I mean, people think it's entertainment, but at the same time, I mean, it's supposed to be a prize fight. You're supposed to be making money doing it.
Exactly. And that art gets lost in like, ooh, flashy move, this whatever, and there's this pop and circumstance that happens, and it's just like, no, this should be a competitive athletic contest, and whether it be MMA, and it's funny, it doesn't matter. And it's pretty apropos that you mentioned Jim Ross, because who essentially I kind of draw upon when I'm talking to fighters and what have you. And it's just like, you, regardless of what you do, right, whether it be jiu-jitsu, boxing, MMA, Muay Thai, whatever, you're not going to get paid unless you bring in ticket sales. So you're essentially, like Jim Ross says, you're putting an ass in every 18 inches. That means, whether people are streaming your fight, from home, going down to the bar and, their watering hole and checking out the fight there in the arena, talking about you, whatever way that you have to do to fucking, if it's a flashy knockout, if it's a, fucking, crazy submission, or just your personality, you could lose. I've talked to guys who have a 50-50 record, but they're a bona fide ticket seller. And it's just like, yeah, it's because you're putting an ass in every 18 inches, and every promoter, doesn't matter. Sometimes records don't matter. I mean, look at Conor McGregor. I mean, he's lost his last 2. Right.
Yeah, look at Chael. Chael, absolutely. He talks people into the building.
West Lynn, Oregon represent, right?
Yeah, that's the mean streets of West Lynn.
Yeah.
So if you've ever been to West Lynn, that's a complete lie.
That's just like the mean streets of Greenwich, Connecticut.
It's exactly the same thing, and that's where he stole it from. Not to mention, so do you remember Chael doing the, when they call you the best fighter, they don't call you the best fighter, they call you Chael's son and beat me if you can?
Yes.
Okay, so he stole that from the grappler here in Portland.
Wait, like Lynn Denton?
Yeah, like Lenny. Yeah, like Lynn Denton, he stole that.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah. Because Lenny used to say, they don't, when you're the greatest wrestler in the world, they don't call you the greatest wrestler. They call you the grappler. Beat me if you can. And Chael, because he's from Oregon, Lenny worked in Oregon for years. Chael asked Lenny, "Hey, can I steal this?" And Lenny's like, "Fuck yeah, go for it, man. Make money." So,
wow. See, I didn't even know that. And that's the funny thing, right? Where MMA fans will just like, oh, I don't like wrestling for the most part. And wrestling fans will be like, I don't like MMA. But you talk to fighters
Yep.
love pro wrestling.
Yep.
Pro wrestlers love MMA. I mean,
Yep.
The Undertaker wears MMA gloves, so did Vader, and it's just like, it's so funny in terms of how it's mirrored in terms of their origins, and there's a lot of similarities, but the world of mass doesn't get it, but the people who are inside the business,
oh yeah,
they get it.
Oh yeah. And the funny thing with that is, if you ask a lot of MMA fighters, what would you be doing if you weren't fighting? I'd be a pro wrestler. Pro wrestlers, oh, what would you be doing? I'd be in MMA. Exactly. That's just how it is. So funny thing, now that we were mentioning Chael, Jay, the guy that taught me to wrestle, we have this YouTube channel called the World Famous Flea Market, and it was up for 6.5 years, and YouTube took it down because it was a little too racy, let's put it that way. And basically it was just us take shitty pro wrestling and Mystery Science Theater and kind of combine them. That's what we were. And one of the matches that we did was from Total Chaos in Eugene. It was ran by the Kaforis, and they keep panning through the crowd on this, and you see a young Chael Sonnen in the front row.
What?
Yeah, it's when he was still wrestling at the U of O, because it was in Eugene at Matt Court, and so we point out like, oh look, it's Chael Sonnen, at this event. So it's just funny shit like that.
Well, first off, I mean, I kind of had no idea. I had been a longtime subscriber of that channel, because the thing about it is what I love so much. Yes.
Oh, yeah,
you guys did Mystery Science Theater for wrestling, which I thought should have been done like eons ago. That's essentially what you guys did, and the guys at High Spots kind of, what I think, I mean, totally took liberties with it and made $5 wrestling, but that was you guys. I mean, you guys did that.
We kind of half stole it from ICP when they did
Juggalo GCW.
Not when they did JCW. They did oh god, was it Slaughter something or other? They basically did like 2 VHS tapes back in the day of Jay and the other guy, commentating over shitty wrestling. They did it. I can't. Slaughter Mania, I want to say was what it was called. I don't remember. But when Jay and I did it, my buddy Jason, we were like, yeah, let's do it. So we did that weekly for 6 years. YouTube took it down. We put it back up, and we've got some other stuff coming out. But yeah, I'm Johnny August, if that helps you at all.
No shit. Oh my god. This is so cool. This is so cool. I know I said it was an honor before, but like, damn, dude, like I really feel privileged, because that was some of the, I mean, that and Kimbo Slice, fights were kind of some of the first things that I saw on YouTube, to be honest with you.
You mean Kimbo's backyard stuff?
Yeah, damn right.
Well, there's that other guy that was with him, that Jorge Masvidal guy that was there.
Yeah, that Jorge Masvidal guy, I think he was like a bad motherfucker or something. Something or other.
Exactly. He started turning out into an okay career.
Yeah, it's kind of weird how it ended up turning out. But I mean, you're a tenured young veteran of the business. Tell me about some of your yes, I borrowed that from the Good Brothers.
Yeah.
Hashtag Impact Wrestling. But I mean, talk to me about some of your favorite memories as, whether it be a performer or in the wrestling business.
So in terms of wrestling, for me, when I first started, we used to get NWA Wildside when I, in 99, 2000, 2001. For some reason, it would come on here in Oregon, and that was when AJ Styles was with Wildside. And I was like, well, I want to be like that guy. And so my dumb ass is trying to do flips and shit like that, and I'm not that good. And so AJ was a big influence on me back then. Jericho has always been a big influence, because I saw Jericho at a show in I want to say I was in Tacoma right after they lifted the ban in the Pacific Northwest to bring wrestling back to the Pacific Northwest because they made it a sport, and Oregon didn't have pro wrestling for many years. But I was like three seats from the aisle, and Jericho comes walking down the aisle, and I was like, holy shit, I'm taller than Jericho. And so I was like, well, all right, we're watching him because I like this style. And it just made me think, well, I can be a wrestler now because I'm as big as he is. He was way thicker than I was, but height-wise, I knew I wasn't going to be a Rey Mysterio, but either way. But yeah, AJ Styles, Jericho, Flair, and Jake Roberts. Those are my guys.
Damn. Yeah, dude. And it's funny because they just did I think it was like the 24 with R-Truth or Ron Killings. And they brought up the Wild Side background. And I mean, so many guys came out of that, David Young, who ended up being an X Division champion in TNA. And, you had obviously, Styles and Killings or K-Quick, right?
Yep.
Abyss, oh my goodness, that was the first. I mean, that guy, never wrestled for the WWE, but he basically wrestled his entire career with Impact, and then ended up being a producer to this day.
Right.
Yeah. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean that was the thing is that was once I got into the business, and realized there was indie wrestling. Wildside was kind of the first thing I'd ever seen because to me, when I was little, Portland wrestling wasn't independent wrestling. Portland wrestling was like, oh, it's the other WWF and WCW or NWA. So Wildside was like, all right, this is in like a high school gym or in a bingo hall or whatever. And I was like, all right, I like this. And so there was memories of that. Like I said, my memory itself is really bad, so I don't have a lot of like this match on this day at this time. I'm not that guy. I have a friend, and legit, his name is Mr. Ooh La La. That's not a work name. That is his shoot name. He's an encyclopedia. Like you could go, hey man, so WrestleMania 6, what was the fourth match? Who was in it? Who was the referee? And how long did it go? And he'll tell you right then. I couldn't tell you who was like the fourth match of the last WrestleMania that was, the pandemic one. I have no fucking idea. But for me, wrestling, it's an art. It was an art form to me, and I was like, okay, I understood the story real early, like good guy versus bad guy. Never been a comic book guy. I always thought comic books were like, I got better things to do. Like I'm gonna go out and play baseball. I'm not gonna sit and read comic books. So pro wrestling was like my comic books growing up.
Yeah.
But I didn't like Hulk Hogan. Savage was okay. Everybody says Savage Steamboat from 3 was greatest ever. Which to me it was until I realized down the road the whole thing was canned. Like Savage canned that match move for move for move for move, start to finish. And I was like, well, now it's not a call in the ring. Whereas Savage Flair Steamboat, even though they had a bajillion Broadways, they were calling it all in the ring. And so that's what I was like, okay, that's the kind of worker I want to be. So like when I would wrestle, I would get guys that I would wrestle from California, and this is no knock on California, but back in the early 2000s, a lot of the Cali guys would want to can everything start to finish. I can't remember all that shit. They'd be like, oh, what do you do? It's like, I'll work your arm. Well, what spots? I don't know. I'm working your arm. Tell it. Okay, well, I'm going to do this and this and this. And I'm like, well, I'm going to let you know. I'm going to ask you 14 times what order these are in while we're in the match because I won't remember. I usually would tell guys, like, all right, here's the 5 things I'm going to do for sure in the match. I don't know where they're going to come, but just know that these 5 things are going to happen. And I'll work your arm or I'll work your neck or I'll work whatever. That's how we're going to do this. Okay, well, so when we chain, we're going to go back. We'll go back and forth and then blah, 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 blah. Okay, all right, well, I'm going to forget that, but whatever. So
that's hilarious. That's hilarious. And that's the crazy thing about it, where we think it like wrestling, right? And if you see it in a ring or what have you, that the wrestling in Florida will be the same as wrestling in Memphis versus wrestling in Portland, Oregon. It couldn't be more different. Absolutely.
Yeah, like Jason, the guy that trained me to wrestle, he learned at APW in California. But then when he started wrestling, he went to Memphis because that's where he's originally from. And so he went from learning the California style to going and wrestling the Southern style. And then when he came back, and taught me, I got mostly Southern style wrestling versus, California style.
Damn. Well, I mean, that's the versatility, of a not a journeyman, because Mike Jackson was, I mean, he was a solid hand for sure.
Yeah. But like Jay always told me, he was like, if you can bump and you can talk, you're gonna get booked. And that was kind of how I based my whole career, is just make sure I could bump for people, because if you can bump for somebody, somebody's always gonna want to work with you.
That's and that's one of the reasons why everybody loved working with Spike Dudley. He was a bump machine.
Yep.
And he could really fucking register. So, I mean, it worked.
Yeah. So, and as a smaller guy, I didn't have much choice. So,
absolutely. Now, I mean, I definitely want to touch on what actually prompted this whole podcast. In terms of the state of wrestling as you see it, my man. So, I mean, obviously there was 2 wrestling paper. I mean, it was an extravaganza. We had Fight Island happen on Saturday. We had Impact Wrestling Slammiversary, and Sunday we had the horror show that was Extreme Rules. What do you make of it all? What wrestling are you watching right now, if any?
Well, I haven't watched regular WWE product, Raw and SmackDown. I probably haven't watched either of those actual shows in 6 or 7 years, because it's just the point. I don't have time. Raw's 3 hours. I think SmackDown's 2 hours. It might be 3. I have no fucking idea. But I don't have that much time. So I watch AEW. I'll usually watch Dark on YouTube. I watch NXT. I'll usually not watch UFCs live. I'll usually watch them the next day. So just depending on who's on the card is who I'll watch. And I haven't watched Impact in forever.
Yep.
So I knew that Sami Callihan worked for them, and that's about as far as my knowledge of Impact went recently. And then I knew that they dropped Tessa. But other than that, I'm like, I don't even know anyone who works there. So funny story with that. So Proud and Powerful from AEW, right?
Right.
Somebody posted on a thread someplace, or like a wrestling thread that I'm on. They started talking about LAX, and they were talking about Ortiz and Santana. And I'm like, wait a minute. So I had to go back and Google. I was like, what happened to Hercules Hernandez and the original AEW, him and Homicide? And because I didn't watch the Impact product, I didn't know the other guys became LAX.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's weird though. I mean, I like you. I probably fell off of Impact when they lost AJ and Samoa Joe, because how do you lose those once in a lifetime type talents and
Right.
you're only like really homegrown stars,
Right.
And you look at the mid to upper mid card of the WWE now, and it's just like, oh, Impact and Ring of Honor stars from 10 years ago. That's essentially it.
Right. Well, but then you have the guys from NXT who, they're like, well, I don't want to go to the main roster because I'm going to get lost in the shuffle with these other 100 fucking dudes. I'm going to stay here and be a star. So they'd rather work for less money, but get TV time, which makes sense to me. And NXT puts out, to me, a superior product, even to most WrestleManias that I've seen. Granted, they have the pomp and circumstance, but, if you put a takeover next to WrestleMania, 9 times out of 10, I'll take the takeover all day long.
Yeah, no. And what's funny to me, because I kind of will bring up this Jim Cornette quote, and you probably know it, but it was a conversation that Jim Cornette had with Bill Watts when they were in Mid-South. And, Bill Watts basically calls Cornette in the room and said, hey, Cornette, when I met you, I thought you used to be the dumbest motherfucker around, but I've met so many dumb motherfuckers since you that you've moved up the ladder without doing anything. And that's essentially what Impact did. They did a straight wrestling pay-per-view, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good matches, decent storytelling, some surprises peppered in, and they essentially had the best pay-per-view of probably this whole quarantine era, with just promoting a wrestling show.
Right. Well, but you've also got to think when you've got Scott D'Amore and help me out, Jackal. What the hell is his name? The 2 writers for Impact.
Callis. Don Callis and D'Amore.
Yeah, I mean, both those guys understand the business, and I mean, they're trying their goddamnedest to make Impact good again, I'm sure, and they understand that people want wrestling. They don't need all the rah bullshit that you get with a 3-hour Raw.
Yeah, and 50-50 booking. Oh, fuck.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times it's you know what's going to happen. Doesn't really matter what program it is. You know what's going to happen. If you understand wrestling booking, and especially in this area, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, man. It's weird, having watched it since '87. I think I've watched the least amount of. I mean, and look, from '87, we had unfortunate wrestler deaths, the death of Owen Hart, the Benoit tragedies, and whatever. And even still, and maybe that tells you about my psyche, which probably I'm not proud of, but I've never watched least amount of WWE produced program than I do right now, and that's yeah.
Well, and again, like I watch NXT, and I think a lot of that has to do with it's more wrestling heavy than the regular shows. But you've got Adam Pearce behind the scenes. You had Jimmy Jacobs behind the scenes. You have your indie guys. I mean, they were indie guys that understand how to tell a story. And Vince isn't overseeing every single thing they do, so you're like, oh, okay, this starts to make sense. Because Adam Pearce, I mean, you got your NWA title back there. Adam Pearce, he's one of the greatest NWA that I've ever seen.
7 levels. I mean, every time I see Dave Marquez, because not only does Marquez do the championship wrestling from Hollywood and the NWA Power and what have you, but like every time, so Marquez also produces Lights Out Extreme Fighting, and it's previous incarnation of LXF. I mean, not LXF, CXF. But every time I see him, I'm all like, fucking 7 levels of hate. 7 levels of hate. Pearce and Cabana. That was like that for me. Even though it was like 10 years removed, it set the table for the NWA title to be relevant again.
Except when they dropped it after the 7, they both pretty much said fuck it. Yeah. So and then I can't remember who it was that owned NWA. Then they dropped it and then Billy Corgan picked it up.
Yeah, Bob Trowbridge. It was Bob Trowbridge to oh gosh, he's Bruce Tharp. Bruce Tharp, that's the name. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Trowbridge to Tharp, and Trowbridge was the good one. Tharp just wanted him catch money grab, and
yeah,
man. But dude, we could talk for hours and hours, but I know you've got places to go. But I mean, do like the Lucha Libre dudes and get your shit in here, kid.
Get your shit in. I mean, long story short, in terms of what I do, I announce and commentate kind of everywhere: Vegas, Hawaii, NorCal, Washington, Oregon. I do some college commentating and announcing as well here in Salem. You can find all my shit at GarettFertig.com if you want that. All my social media is Garett Fertig. It's 1 R 2 T's because everybody misspells it. So it's just what it is. I mean, in the pandemic, good luck getting a gig. I got one gig coming up, and it's a grappling event in September that I'm commentating and announcing with Ed Herman, Short Fuse from UFC, my commentating partner.
Yeah.
And Ricky Simone, he's another UFC. He's on that card. It's a team grappling no-gi tournament that I'm commentating and announcing. But other than that, man, the schedule's open because then shit happening.
Yeah, man. Well, and then where can they find you on social media?
Garett Fertig. I mean, you can either go to GarettFertig.com or just on Facebook, Instagram, all of it. It's just Garett Fertig. So easy to find.
Hell yeah. Dude, I think we got to do this again. This needs to be an addendum. So, I'm going to circle back for sure.
Sounds good, man.
All right. Well, guys, thank you guys for joining us. This has been Garett Fertig, and I am According to Woods, and we are out. Thank you guys for joining us.
Later.
Bro, thank you so